Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Mars had always been a red planet, but for Elena Vasquez, it had never felt redder than that. The Mars colony, built on promises of equality and shared prosperity, was rotting under the grip of the Communist Party. They controlled the oxygen, the water, and the energy, all the things that made survival possible on this barren, frozen wasteland. Elena had watched her father and younger brother die because of it, suffocating in a system designed to starve the poorest of what little they had. That was the spark that ignited her rebellion, and she would be damned if she let it die out now. She stood before a crowd in the lower sectors, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edges of the makeshift podium. Behind her, the air recyclers hummed, barely keeping up with the demand for breathable air. These were the sectors where the oxygen was thin and water was rationed. These were the people who had been left to wither under the iron grip of Premier Nikolai Grigorov's regime. Every day, they tighten the noose around our necks, Elena said, her voice gaining strength. Every day we have to beg for the basics, air, water, energy, while the rich in Sector 1 live like gods, but it's not because there isn't taka enough, it's because they control it. They control us. A mix of men and women with hollow eyes and sunken cheeks murmured in agreement. These were people who had seen their children die from dehydration, who had watched family members choke as the air thinned during one of the frequent technical malfunctions that always seemed to hit the lower sectors hardest. Elena's words were fire, and they needed that heat more than they needed anything else right now. But we can change it. We can stop being their pawns in this rigged game they call an election. But first, we have to stand up. We have to fight back. In the back of the crowd, Sergei Makarov watched her with wary eyes. He had seen this kind of passion before, and it didn't always end well. But Elena had something different. She had courage. More than that, she had proof that could topple the regime if used the right way. Sergei had worked as an engineer for the government, fixing the very air recyclers that kept this sector alive. He knew the system inside out. He also knew that the resource allocation wasn't random. It was manipulated. The party was tightening the supply in certain sectors, using it as leverage to force votes, keeping the population under control. The election was nothing more than a puppet show. He had seen the coding that directed where resources went, and it was all tied to voting patterns and loyalty to the party. He had come to Elena 3 weeks ago, his face gaunt, his eyes full of guilt. She was the only candidate in years who had dared challenge the party's monopoly, and the only one with enough fire to stand a chance. Together, they formed a partnership. She would be the face of the movement, and he would be the brains behind the scenes. After the rally, they met in the shadows of an old ventilation shaft hidden from the ever-watchful eyes of Grigorov's enforcer. Elena wiped sweat from her brow, her hand shaking from the adrenaline still rushing through her veins. They believe in you, Sergei said quietly. Elena nodded, though the weight of their belief felt like a burden she wasn't sure she could carry. We need more than belief. We need the truth to come out. Sergey's hand trembled as he pulled a small data chip from his pocket. This is it, the proof of everything, the resource allocation algorithms, the fraudulent voting codes, the entire system. Once this goes public, they can't hide anymore. Elena stared at the chip, a tiny piece of metal that held the potential to bring down the most powerful regime on Mars. Her heart pounded in her chest. This was what they needed, but it was also what made them a target. Premier Grigorov wouldn't toss it idly by and let her expose him. She knew the risks, but they had gone too far to back down now. We'll release it on the night of the election, Elena said, her voice firm. Once the results are rigged and everyone sees it for themselves, the whole colony will rise up. They won't stand for this anymore. Sergei nodded, though his expression remained grim. You need to be careful, Elena. Grigorov won't let you get that far without a fight. He will do everything in his power to silence you. I know, she whispered, but this isn't just about me anymore. It's about all of us. As they parted ways, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something was closing in on her. The night was colder than usual, the stars above barely visible through the thick, smoggy atmosphere of the colony. Her heart was heavy, but her resolve was steel. There was no turning back now. Premier Nikolai Grigorov sat behind a massive desk in his office, the walls lined with screens displaying various parts of the colony. His face was hard as stone, his eyes narrowed as he watched the footage from the latest rally in Sector 3. Elena Vasquez, that name had become a thorn in his side, and he was done playing game. She's gaining too much traction, he muttered, rubbing his temple. His advisors stood silently around him, afraid to speak unless addressed directly. If she exposes the resource control system, it could ignite an uprising. We cannot allow that to happen. One of his top enforcers, Ivan Volkov, stepped forward. A hulking man with cold eyes and a reputation for brutality. Ivan was the regime. Ice go to man when things needed to be handled. "What would you like me to do, Premier?" Ivan asked, his voice low and menacing. Grigorov leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "It's time we remind the people who stand in charge. Disrupt her rallies, intimidate her supporters, and if she gets too close to the truth," his eyes darkened, "make sure she doesn't get a chance to speak." Ivan nodded once and turned to leave, a silent force of violence waiting to be unleashed. Over the next few days, the tension in the colony mounted. Elena's rallies became the target of sabotage. Her headquarters were vandalized, her volunteers threatened, and her speeches were mysteriously cut off mid-broadcast. Every time she tried to speak, the government found a way to silence her, but she refused to be cowed. On the day of her final rally, just 3 days before the election, Elena stood before her largest crowd yet. Thousands of people had gathered in the central square, their faces lit by the dim glow of the colony's sun artificial lighting. Elena could feel the weight of their hope pressing down on her, and it terrified her, but it also gave her strength. "We are not slaves," she shouted, her voice echoing off the metal walls of the square. "We are not pawns in their game. We are human beings, and we have the right to breathe, to drink, to live, and we will not be silent." The crowd roared in response, their cheers shaking the very ground beneath her feet. But even as she spoke, she knew the danger was closing in. Ivan Volkov and his enforcers were watching from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. As Elena finished her speech, Sergei approached her, his face pale and tense. "We need to get you out of here," he whispered. "There's word that Grigorov, Shenton are on their way. This rally is too big for them to ignore." Elena nodded, her heart pounding. "I want to let them scare me off." But even as she said it, she knew they had to be careful. She had seen what happened to those who crossed Grigorov. People disappeared, or worse, were found dead under mysterious circumstances. As the crowd began to disperse, Elena and Sergei slipped into the maze of alleys that twisted through the lower sectors, hoping to avoid detection. But they weren't too quick enough. A group of armed enforcers blocked their path, their faces hidden behind visors. At the head of the group stood Ivan Volkov, his lips curled into a cold, cruel smile. "Elena Vasquez," he said, his voice like gravel, "you've ever been causing quite a stir." Elena held her breath as Ivan Volkov stepped closer. The narrow alley walls seemed to close in, suffocating her with the reality of the danger she now faced. She could see the hard, brutal glint in his eyes, a man who had long abandoned any shred of conscience for power and control. Behind him, his enforcers stood ready, their weapons drawn, cutting off any hope of escape. "You have been very vocal," Ivan continued, his gravelly voice laced with malice. "But you should have known better. No one stands against the party and walks away unscathed." Sergei shifted beside her, his hand brushing against her arm, as if to signal he was ready to fight. But Elena knew that would be suicide. They were outnumbered and outgunned, with no way to overpower Grigorov's enforcers. She had to think fast. "I'm not afraid of you, Volkov," Elena said, her voice steady despite the thundering in her chest. "And neither are the people. They're waking up, they see the truth now, and no amount of violence will stop them." Volkov's smile widened, a predator toying with its prey. "You're naive if you think they care about your truth. Fear controls them, and fear will continue to control them long after you're gone." The words were like cold metal against her skin, but Elena did flint. "Maybe, but fear only works for so long. Eventually, it breaks, and when it does, you'll be the one running." Volkov's face hardened at the defiance in her voice. He nodded to one of the enforcers, who took a step forward, raising a baton. "Enough," Volkov growled. "Take her." Before the enforcer could reach her, a figure dropped from above a shadow in the dim light of the alley. The man landed silently, and with one swift motion, he disarmed the enforcer, sending him crashing into the wall. It was Sergei who took the opening, throwing his weight into another enforcer and knocking him off balance. The alley erupted into chaos. Elena barely had time to register what was happening before she felt someone grab her arm and pull her deeper into the maze of alley. It was the man who had appeared out of nowhere, his face obscured by a hood, moving with the grace and precision of someone well-versed in guerrilla tactics. Who she started to ask, but he cut her off. Keep moving, no time to explain. Sargi followed close behind, limping slightly from his earlier scuffle, but otherwise unharmed. The sounds of Volkov barking orders and the heavy footsteps of his enforcers echoed in the distance as they ran, but the labyrinth of valleys worked in their favor, providing cover. They rounded corner after corner, their path twisting deeper into the underbelly of the colony. Finally, the man led them into a hidden alcove behind an abandoned ventilation shaft, where they crouched low, listening for any signs of pursuit. The man pulled down his hood, revealing a weathered, rugged face. His sharp blue eyes flicked between Alina and Sargi, assessing them with quick efficiency. You picked a hell of a time to stir the pot. Who are you? Alina asked, catching her breath. I've been watching your campaign for weeks, figured it was only a matter of time before Grigorov sent dogs. Why help us, Sargi asked, his voice filled with suspicion. Luca's eyes darkened. Let's just say I've got no love for Grigorov, says Rajiv. The more people like you who push back, the better chance we all have. Alina studied him for a moment, trying to gauge his intention. Something about him felt off, but she couldn't afford to turn away helped. Now, not when they were so close to exposing the truth. What's your plan? Luca asked, turning to Alina. She straightened her back, regaining her composure. We have proof that Grigorov's been manipulating the election, controlling the flow of resources to force loyalty. I am going to release it during my final rally, right before the election results are announced. Once the people see the truth, they'll rise up. Luca's jaw tightened. That's a dangerous gamble. You think the party's just gonna sit back and let that happen? They wouldn't have a choice, Alina replied. Once the people see how deep the corruption goes, Gregorov won't be able to contain the outrage. Sargi chimed in. We have the data. All we need is a secure way to broadcast it colony-wide. The party controls the media, but we've been working on an alternative. Luca leaned back, considering their words. I know a few backdoor channels. We could use the old cam towers from before the party stage takeover. They were off the grid now, but still functional. Alina nodded. That could work. How soon can we make it happen? Luca glanced at Sargi with his technical expertise, and a bit of luck, we could be ready by election night. Good, Alina said, her eyes blazing with determination. Then we move forward. No more waiting. We end this. Election night arrived, and the colony buzzed with nervous energy. The party had ramped up security, deploying armed enforcers throughout the streets, making it clear that dissent would not be tolerated. Gregorov stood at the center of it all, confident in his iron grip over the colony, certain that his victory was already sealed. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. Elena's words had struck a chord with the people, and even in the wealthier sectors, whispers of unrest could be heard. The resource shortages had pushed many to the edge, and now, for the first time, they were beginning to see the cracks in the party's own control. Alina, Sargi, and Luca moved quietly through the shadows, making their way to the old communication towers on the outskirts of the colony. The tension between them was palpable. Everything rested on this moment. One wrong move, and they would be silenced forever. At the base of the tower, Sardi set to work, connecting wires and inputting commands into a portable console. Luca kept watch, his eyes scanning the perimeter for any sign of enforcer. Alina stood beside Sargi, her heart pounding in her chest as the countdown began. Are we in? Alina asked, her voice low but urgent. Sargi nodded, his fingers flying over the console, almost just a few more seconds. Suddenly, a blaring alarm echoed through the streets. Elena's heart skipped a beat. They had been found. Move faster, Luca hissed, drawing his weapon. Elena's pulse raced as Senor worked furiously, sweat dripping down his face. The sound of boots hitting the pavement grew louder, closer. She glanced at Luca, who had positioned himself at the entrance to the tower, ready to defend them with his life, if necessary. Then, just as the first enforcer rounded the corner, Sargi let out a breath of relief. Alina wasted no time. She stepped forward, grabbing the microphone connected to the comment system. Her voice broadcasted to the entire colony. People of Mars, she began, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "You had been lied to. The election is a sham, a tool used by the party to keep us under their control. But we have the proof. We have the truth. And tonight, we were taking it back." As her words echoed across the colony, Sergia uploaded the data files, showing the party's and manipulation of resources, their rigged voting systems, their crimes against the people. It was all laid bare for everyone to see. Alina continued, her voice rising in defiance. "We are not slaves. We are not pawns in their game. We are human beings, and we will no longer be controlled by fear. Tonight, we rise." The response was immediate. Across the colony, people poured into the streets, their voices raised in anger and determination. The enforcers were overwhelmed, unable to contain the uprising. At the base of the tower, Elena stood tall, watching as the colony erupted into rebellion. This was what they had fought for. This was the beginning of the end for Gregorov's regime. But even as victory seemed within reach, Elena knew the fight was far from over. Gregorov would not go down without a final brutal confrontation, and when it came, she would be ready.